Sounds good. All right.
Okay. All right, and this may take a second here as I look for everyone. Okay, so I see I've promoted Valli here.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. How about we do this,
Alondra's
Sean?
here. Alondra's there. Edith, Janet.
Alondra. I promoted Alondra. Edith.
Yes.
I've promoted Edith. Janet.
Janet.
I have promoted Janet. Who else here?
Ruth. Rosemary.
Ruth.
Yeah.
Okay, Rosemary. Hold on, let me do this first. Rosemary.
And Ruth.
Whoops. Ruth.
And also Vanessa.
Vanessa.
Sean, I'm not on the panel.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just attending.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Sorry. All right, I will. So sorry, who said that?
That was Rosemary.
Rosemary. Okay. All right. I'll demote Aaron and some other folks here, and I'll cross-reference in a moment here. But let me, for the sake of time, let me just introduce myself very quickly and let Sean take over the rest of the way, and I'll kind of do some administrative stuff behind the curtain here. So my name is Jim McCafferty. I'm an executive board member for CrimCon. Thank you everybody for coming. This is stream 3. This is the 12 p.m. Panel, bringing the margins together, creating safe spaces for BIPOC inside the classroom and out. For anybody that's attending, this is a roundtable. There is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Please type your questions there, and the panelists will be reviewing them and taking questions as well. But for the rest of the time, we'll let Sean be the leader here. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all your help. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all the attendees who are here with us today. We are the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the Division on Women in Crime, which is a division in the American Society of Criminology. And as a committee, we've been tasked with doing work around diversity and inclusion as far as making the division more inclusive and welcoming for all. And our tasks have grown substantially since the police-involved killing of George Floyd. And we've been tasked with various tasks around bringing forth the voices, lived experiences, and perspectives of marginalized scholars. Scholars oftentimes who are underread, undercited, and underappreciated by mainstream criminology, sociology, and criminal justice. And so now is an extremely important time for divisions across disciplines to begin to think about being intentional when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And we have an exciting virtual forum coming up in June, on June 4th, which is going to be an anti-racism and intersectionality in feminist criminology. It's going to be a day-long virtual forum where we're going to address issues around diversity and inclusion, racism, ableism, sexism, and all the various other isms that are important for us to study as criminologists. And we also have some hopefully new awards that will focus on rewarding community engaged scholars and students as well. So that's kind of just a brief little overview of what we've done as a community. And of course, moving forward, we want to continue our great work. And I'm joined with some amazing scholars and students here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Sean Wilson. I'm an assistant professor of sociology and criminal justice at William Paterson University. And I'm the co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And I'm joined with my phenomenal co-chair, Valli, who I'll allow to introduce herself, and I'll allow the other committee members to introduce themselves as well. So thank you everyone again for joining us today.
Sean, I'm so sorry to interrupt very quickly, but can I just make an announcement? Anybody that I've missed promoting to a panelist, if you would just send me a private message in the chat, I will go ahead and promote you. Sorry to interrupt, Sean.
And we have Rimonda too. I see just joined.
Rimonda.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I will do that right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. So I'm Valli Rajah. I'm at John Jay College in the City University of New York, and it's been my pleasure to be working on this committee for several years and co-chairing with Sean for the last two. So thank you so much for joining us today. Who else do we have here?
I guess I will go and then I'll take it to the next person. My name is Edith Kinney. I'm an associate professor at San Jose State University in the Department of Justice Studies. And my work focuses on criminal justice reform movements, as well as human rights and legal studies. And I apologize in advance. I have I'm co-chairing our campus task force on policing, although they retiled it community policing. So I think maybe that I'm getting a signal from the president about what they want. But I was put on the calendar for the president's cabinet meeting really late. So I was going to take the spirit and wisdom of my my colleagues here on this panel or roundtable and share that with our president. So I will have to depart early, but hopefully we'll be able to bounce back if y'all are still here. But thank you for hosting.
Hi, my name is Rimonda. I'm an assistant professor in the criminal justice department at Endicott College, which is a smaller liberal arts school in Massachusetts. And my research area primarily focuses on race and justice issues in sentencing, especially in the juvenile justice system. And I'm part of a committee right now that's working on decolonizing our curriculum here. So this panel is really fitting for this time.
Hi everyone, my name is Janet Garcia Hallett. I am an assistant professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. It's a mouthful. My research is predominantly on the reentry experiences of women of color and taking an intersectional approach. And I'll pass it off to Vanessa.
Great, thanks so much. I'm Vanessa Panfill. I'm an associate professor at Old Dominion University in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. And most of the work that I do has to do with the intersection of gender and sexuality in people's lives. Most of my research focuses on LGBTQ populations and their experiences with crime, victimization, gangs, and the juvenile and criminal justice systems. I'll pass it to Alondra.
Hey everyone, my name is Alonzo Garza. I am a PhD student at Sam Houston State University. This is my second year serving on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the DWC. And my research area focuses on victimization, particularly violence against women and how we respond to it. Ruth?
And my name's Ruth Larrysteiner. I'm faculty at the University of Delaware, not in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice, but in the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences. Most of my work focuses on gender-based violence and intimate partner abuse. And I am relatively, actually quite new to this committee, that several of us connected with this committee under the leadership of Jane Palmer as we're trying to sort of explore the DWC's response to the uprisings this summer.
And thank you, everyone. And as everyone sees, I mean, these are some amazing, phenomenal scholars whose work we all should become to familiarize ourselves with. And it's unfortunate that in the discipline, there are way too many people who I would say don't receive their flowers, right? We need to begin to give people their flowers while they're here, appreciate their work, before they become big superstars, right? And so I've oftentimes found that, you know, we have up and coming emerging superstars who are doing great work, and they don't necessarily always get the support. It seems to be when they become well known and appreciated, then people begin to fully support and share their work. So we should, you know, share each other's work, especially up and coming graduate students. And that's something that we as a committee seek to do. So my first question for all of you, bringing the margins to the center has been a theme that we've used for many of our roundtables throughout the years at ASC, here at CrimCom, and most likely at next year's ASC. So my question for all of you is, what does bringing the margins to the center mean to you, and why is it important?
So I guess I can go first with that question. For me, margins are borders or boundaries that are meant to restrict you within a limited space, but also to keep you from certain opportunities on the outside. So we see this with underrepresented students. There are plenty of margins kind of set around them that hurt their ability to progress not only in society, but also within higher education. So when we mention bringing the margins center, I imagine it as limiting or abolishing those boundaries, those restrictions, and expanding on the amount of opportunities that are available for them and accessible to them.
Janet, I think you said it perfectly, and I think that this really encompasses the mission of our committee. You know, appropriately so, bringing the margins center is rooted in Black feminist thought and critical race theory, where you're reaching the furthest person in the room. And I think in terms of education, academia, and the classroom, it's remembering about transgressing these boundaries for students and remembering that education is a liberatory practice.
My work, I guess, is trying to bring the experiences of formerly incarcerated students and system impacted students to the attention of our administrators. I'm getting, for example, pushback from some folk, well-intentioned, I believe, folks who don't want to malign certain groups of first-gen students or underrepresented students, but in so doing, they kind of have this fantasy, perhaps, of what our student body is in the CSU. And so I take our charge to be, you know, the higher education for the people. And I think centering especially in our department, where a lot of students are coming from systems impacted communities, but also interested in working in the system. And so I think bringing the experiences of systems impacted people to administrators to understand why many people are having challenges. It's not just academic success and metrics and those kinds of things. And so right now, I think, you know, I've been really grateful for this committee in particular for kind of raising some of these concerns about the role of the academy and kind of the college to cop pipeline, but also how artfully or less artfully some of our faculty members are negotiating some of the changes that we're seeing, even just around language, not to mention kind of curricular overhaul. So this is I think it's a valuable time for us to be here, but I really think the move to center folks to them that are on the margins, it has to navigate the administrative and bureaucratic kind of gauntlet, perhaps, right? So I'm trying to make sure that we're able to keep those voices authentic and to make sure that the resilience of our students is appreciated and acknowledged. And so as a white woman kind of working in communities of color spaces where I try to, you know, lift those voices, it's a challenging and a steep learning curve often, right? So I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to center my colleagues of color and my students of color, because they've really opened up a lot of eyes, I think, in the administration. So I'm in this, how do we take it from the classroom and into the broader kind of university structure to interrogate those spaces? and not just in listening sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to, like you mentioned, to center the voices of the formerly incarcerated, to bring the margins to the center. And by doing that, we help to legitimize this discipline, right? Because I've seen the discipline to be illegitimate, to be a discipline that maintains systems of oppression and inequality due to, right, the reality that they oftentimes push the voices of the oppressed and the marginalized to the margins. And so centering their voices, I would say, helps to legitimize this flawed discipline.
Even just in the ways we've talked about various groups of people, right? We've all gone to the ASC meeting and heard people refer to, formerly incarcerated people in terrible, dehumanizing ways, right? And these are members of our communities. These are folks who have very relevant experience to help us actually decarcerate and right. And so I find that it's really important also to bring the margins center, because our discipline has often engaged in these sort of us versus them kinds of conversations. People involved in crime or gangs are people out there. They're out there, not here, or they're these kinds of people, not our kind of people. And these are really, as I mentioned, dehumanizing, inaccurate, unfair representations. And so I think there's a lot of work that we can do in our classrooms to break down those kinds of false barriers that we as a society have created for society's benefit, right? That does not benefit our students.
I'll just put a plug in here that I'm starting a white gangs class, alt-right gang, as kind of as our gangs curriculum, and recentering white collar crime to look at some of the social impacts of what we decide is and is not worthy of academic study in crim spaces.
I agree with so much of what all of you said, and what an amazing class that sounds like. I'd like to take a class like that. When I think about these issues, I think about the two related ideas of being experience-centered and structurally aware, which is what I think all of you had said. But also what I think about is issues of kind of specificity and then universality, right? So as we're thinking about breaking down the barriers, there's so much unique experience, and then there is also a lot of shared experience. I actually sort of struggle with those issues, which in my own work I think about in terms of intersectionality, but really honoring that complexity, I think that's a big part of the challenge that we face, and that many of you have mentioned. But it's a challenge worth taking up and working through.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we all navigate academic spaces, and we're all committed to diversity and inclusion. How do we make academic spaces more inclusive? What can we do?
Well, because I'm going to have to bounce here in a minute, I'm going to put this out and see if the group has anything I can take away to our president. One of the things that I've really struggled with, I guess, is, and I don't know if this is geographic or what, but kind of figuring out how as an ally or accomplice, that I can interrogate anti-Blackness in my Latinx and my Asian student kind of groups, right? Because we have majority minority, quote unquote, majority minority campus, but there's a lot of discrimination, both kind of overt and covert, against our Black students and our Black faculty and our Black staff. And so part of I think this work is it's both challenging because of the kind of dynamics, but I share kind of class dynamics with some of my students. And so figuring out how to better integrate those into the classroom, so this becomes a space of learning and engagement. And one of the kind of concerns that I've had recently, and I think we've talked about it briefly before, is how to engage white students in this process without an alienation effect. I see the kind of radicalization of some of our students, and particularly anti-Semitism kind of going through a lot of different really quirky ways, but the internet has really sped up a lot of the concerns that I have regarding how students are navigating race and how they're learning about it as a social construct, but also learning about it as a thing that has real consequence, right, for folks. And so one of the ways that I've been working on this is to figure out better ways of assessing what makes students feel safe or unsafe, right? And in my capacity on this task force, kind of really pushing some abolitionist ideas about how do we take those goals and don't leave people exposed, right, to further danger or different kind of alternative forms of either incarceration or surveillance that pop up in the place, right, of more traditional systems of criminal justice or social control. So this is a really new kind of emerging field, and I feel like there's much that could be said in the criminology space, but so it is very frustrating to me when we kind of revert back to another task force, right? So I'm complicit in the thing that I'm critiquing, but how do we use the moment and the very real harms that are, I'm struggling to process. I don't know how my students are processing, and we don't have the face-to-face time to make it a safe conversation to have. And so I'm really working to try to figure out how we can meet students where they are and address their kind of more immediate needs, right? And maybe this does take on anti-racist kind of work in a broader sense, but a lot of people I know are struggling with housing, with food, with working, with how the hell you're supposed to be on 5 Zoom calls a day at home in your bedroom. And so I think working a lot to kind of meet students where we are and to help them mobilize their rights has been one way that I think it's wakes professors and faculty up to the challenges that our students are facing today, but also provides a kind of a way for students to learn life skills that they can empower themselves, right? So I've, for example, incorporated some, what's a social problem in your community that you have? Okay, well, let's figure out who is in charge of it and kind of, work on how do we do human rights reporting on a criminal justice issue in your community. But I really, am inspired by the students that are sticking it out, and I will say my formerly incarcerated systems impacted students are some of my most my best students insofar as they're engaged. But I really think there's a lot of support that needs doing, and I'm hoping that we're up to the challenge. But the compounding effects of the pandemic on top of these other pre-existing challenges has been a struggle. But I really think we have an opportunity at this moment with the pandemic, with the uprisings, and with this kind of hopefully shift in tone in our politics, that we'll be able to use this as a launching pad to actually implement some of the kinds of ideas and challenge. And maybe we will fail in some of those things, but I think being open about, we're trying something new, we got to do something different. And students are up for the challenge and along for the ride. So I'm really excited about that. And I would invite any suggestions, if y'all have suggestions on what campus safety means and how better to more realistically assess it other than a campus climate survey. I would invite any of your expertise.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead, Janet.
So Edith and Sean, you both mentioned the uprisings this year, and this year with the killings of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, like several universities released statements claiming to promote social justice and to fight against racial injustices. But when you speak with faculty of color and when you speak with students of color at many of these same institutions, you learn that these claims are just that, unsubstantiated claims. So to put it bluntly, talk is cheap. It's easy to put something in a public solidarity statement. It's harder to actually demonstrate that the university is invested in its underrepresented students. It's harder for a university to show that it values the lives, perspectives, and experiences of those same underrepresented students. So with looking at these public statements, it was often a frustration because there was no action behind it. In terms of looking at the complaints from both the faculty of color and students and students of color. In terms of classroom discussions about everything that happened this year or that has been happening historically, I think it's important not to allow the white voices to dominate these spaces, because these voices are often what's dominated in textbooks, in media, historical accounts from professors, right? If desired, keyword if desired, students of color should be allowed to openly express themselves, but without professors specifically requiring them to. So that means professors not specifically calling on students of color in the classroom as Black tokens. Even as a student, there have been several times where others have asked me for the Black perspective on a reading in grad school, or the Black perspective of growing up in Harlem during the war on drugs, right? This is tokenizing. This is tokenizing a student, a Black perspective as the spokesperson for all things Black. This is uncomfortable for students. It can be uncomfortable for others who witness it happen before their eyes. So it's one thing for a student to kind of volunteer their opinion and share their opinion. Is another thing to expect a marginalized student to volunteer their effort and time to teach others about themselves. So that's just one way to kind of work towards inclusion out of many several ways.
Yeah, that last note is key there, right? Like, there's no one thing that can be done. There's so many different avenues that need to be pursued in order to really create safe and inclusive spaces. And something that I think is really important across all institutions is a microaggressions training, or at least a continuous discussion about microaggressions. Something that students at my school started was an Instagram, where students of color could send experiences that they've experienced on campus, whether it was from a faculty or from another student, something that that was really uncomfortable for them. And it has been brought to the administration, but in microaggressions training was implemented that was voluntary, but it was run by student activities directors who really are not experienced or trained to really explain microaggressions or the impact of microaggressions. Not that you need a specific training, but they just, had a PowerPoint that was pulled off of the internet, and that's not something that's really going to help faculty understand that their language can impact the students. And, it's no secret that this discipline is largely older white males who have a way of speaking and may unconsciously speak in a harmful way to students. And it is really important to address that, I think, in these smaller liberal arts schools that are predominantly underrepresented in terms of diversity for faculty and staff. That's something that needs to be prioritized. We need to understand how to speak to our students without harming them every day, because that will also encourage other students to speak the same way. And again, we just keep perpetuating the same problematic conversations. And so if we really want to create a safe space, our faculty need to lead the charge, but that will also trickle down to the student body.
And even what we're talking about in our classrooms, right, in terms of who we're reading, who we're claiming are experts. I mean, I don't know if y'all have seen there was a move in ASA, there were all sorts of t-shirts and tweets, cite Black women, cite Black women. I cannot tell you how many criminology professors or criminology courses I've seen have no African-American scholars on the syllabus, or aren't talking about diverse experiences, right? And or talking about scholars as the experts who they are and the ideas that they're bringing to the classroom. And it's relevant to my prior comment, we are alleging that these sort of us versus them beliefs, or those people out there are somehow, benefiting society. It's benefiting patriarchal, classist society, racist society, right? we don't want to replicate that in our classrooms. And so if we actually shift in terms of who do we see as an expert, who do we see as contributing meaningfully, why are we assigning the same white canon from 70 years ago? Why are we doing that when we have amazing work happening in various areas related to abolition, related to reproductive justice, related to environmental justice, environmental racism? Why aren't we reading Indigenous scholars? Why aren't we reading, And so again, I know that's about materials, but I also think it's about a broader shift to, again, whose ideas matter and whose ideas should we consider? And when students see themselves reflected, then that also bolsters their sense of being an expert and not, and again, I appreciate the comments that have been made. And I think Janet's point, especially about you do not want to tokenize students, but I also, as you mentioned, we also need to encourage them to they do have relevant things to bring to the classroom, right? It's not just I'm the professor who knows everything. And you're the one learning. I see a comment from Jason Williams to see that they are the experts too. And in fact, if I remember correctly, Dr. Williams will say like, oh, here, Dr. So-and-so, Dr. Student, right? You're the doctor now. It's not just me, Dr. Williams, but you, the Dr. Student, right? And so, yeah, so I'm sort of getting too excited to make my thoughts coherent right now, sorry. But again, just who are we reading? Who are we talking about? Why aren't we also reading from activists who are releasing statements? Why aren't we reading, more sorts of diverse perspectives? So I'll stop talking because I am like really animated right now. But I just think, again, like who do we count as experts, and what that matters to our students. And they can also then see themselves in the future as professionals of any variety, as student activists, as advocates. They start to see that also as legitimate and as a meaningful way to make change. And to me, that's incredibly important in my classrooms.
Yeah, and you really just stress the importance of having a inclusive and critical curriculum. And curriculum can be empowering. Like I remember my experience as a PhD student at Texas Southern University. I see Michael Mitchell's in here and Jason Williams are both in here. We all went to the same program. And I was so happy. At TSU, it's required that you have to take a race and crime course. And there's a section on comps that strictly is geared towards race and crime. So you're leaving that program as an expert. One of your areas of expertise is going to be race and crime by default, because that was part of our curriculum. And it was so empowering to get there and see the curriculum and study Black scholars and realize that, this program really appreciates scholars that look like me. And it really changed my whole view of criminology. Like what, like this is, although I did have my own knowledge, right, of Black scholars, of course, but to see a program in a curriculum that, was unapologetically Black was transformative. And,
yeah.
And it made that program, all the challenges of, of all, typically, the challenges we experience as PhD students, but it made it so much more meaningful to navigate that experience, knowing that, I'm going to go into class and I'm going to read meaningful stuff that matters, stuff that can change lives and communities and policies. And unfortunately, many mainstream programs, lack that. And so we find that a lot of scholars of color enter these programs and in a sense, they may lose motivation to continue. They don't feel like they matter or belong. And I don't think a lot of criminologists or even programs, realize how important the curriculum is. And yeah, I think you stressed that. And also Janet, spoke to, the symbolic responses to racial uprising in this country, and how many scholars of color really don't believe that these are legitimate strategies to transform these institutions, and that it's really just symbolic gestures to try to make people happy and make their institutions look better.
Well, in the interest of avoiding that happening at SJSU, I am going to bounce here to meet with the president's cabinet and hopefully bring some of this energy and enthusiasm for substantive change and centering the margins up in the cabinet space. So I'm sorry to have to leave, but I really appreciate everyone's enthusiasm, and Dr. Williams will look forward to talking with you again soon about Project Rebound. All right, take care, y'all. Bye. Sorry, I have to leave.
And I guess before I move on to the next question, did anybody else want to chime in on how we can make academic spaces more inclusive?
I had a question, but we're maybe going to cycle to it sort of next. So here. First of all, I'm loving the enthusiasm. So fantastic to see the chat too. You guys have said so many amazing things, that there are many ways to approach this. We want to move away from daily harm. We want to diversify our scholarship and the citation process to bring new literature center. Here's my question. How do we get community agreement around these things? So I'm so thrilled to be here with you, to hear you all say this. My guess is we agree. How do we move to a place where we're bringing in some of the other folks? Because I kind of imagine that part of this is really needing community agreement around this. And I don't know if that's such a hard question. It's just the one that I struggle with, I'm sure, or I assume other people struggle with as well. Yeah.
I guess my question is, why is there a need for community agreement?
Very good question.
Oftentimes universities focus on, they make decisions based on money, and that's not always the best decision for students, especially underrepresented students. So I'm not quite sure why we need the community.
It's a very good question, and I guess I need to define the community. I meant all of the people who are in the academic space.
To get buy-in from other colleagues who may not see the importance of diversity and inclusion.
Yes, that's what I meant.
I would say, to me, I think we just really need to rebuild some of these communities. So if that means hiring more people who will support critical research, I think that's the way to do it, because unfortunately, we're probably not going to be able to change everyone's views. And so I think the next best step, and with tenure, it's kind of hard to, the easy step I would be just get rid of all of them and replace them. But unfortunately, with tenure, unfortunately, we can't replace problematic faculty members. I think the best thing we can do is just try to find ways to bring in new people with new ideas, new perspectives, and find ways to support them and help them grow. And you would hope that by doing that, you could change the community. And so I'm really intentional with everything that I do. So any chance that there's a search committee, I'm going to try to volunteer, because I know how important those committees are and how those committees can exclude people from even getting an interview or even having an opportunity to potentially be hired. And so I think that's the best way. The best strategy is to try to change the community.
I think you bring up a great point, Sean. It might be idealistic to assume that everyone that comes into academia has the same goals as us in terms of transformative social justice. But at the end of the day, this is just a job for some people. They come in, they get their paycheck, and we're never going to get buy-in. It is what it is. But yes, I think that's such an important point in terms of job committees. I think right now it's very, for lack of a better word, it's very sexy. Everyone's hiring, critical race criminologists. Everyone's looking for a race and crime expert. And I wonder how long this fad will last. Maybe the next market cycle, we're not sure. But a point in terms of remembering that this is a continuous recommitment to social justice and collaboration. We cannot be placated with small progress. And this 1 year that everyone wants to hire this type of scholar in their program, we'll see how long it lasts, but just that remembrance that developing this is a continuous recommitment and self-introspection.
Yeah, so I guess the next question, and I guess you don't have to answer this question if you don't feel comfortable, because it's kind of, I guess, a little bit more personal than the prior questions. But the question is, have you had any experiences or challenges in a space that wasn't inclusive? And if so, how did you navigate that space?
I have I guess as a graduate student, and I'll talk about the graduate student perspective, graduate student of color, first generation. I hate to say this, but you have to pick and choose your battles, right? Like, I don't have a job, you know, structurally, everyone has like an academic Karen experience, and you wrote that wonderful piece about it. And we talk about it amongst ourselves, like, you know, students and faculty of color. But that's what I've found. Like, I haven't been able to fight all the situations. You know, a very prolific scholar in the field told my colleague and I about a paper that we wrote, an op-ed about, you know, people of color in academia, that these were not the experiences of people of color in academia, you know, and she's a Black woman. And it's like, well, what could we do in that situation? You know, like, I still don't have the answer, and I don't know if this has happened to other graduate students, and I hope, you know, to hear that once you cross to the other side, it maybe gets a little bit better in terms of picking and choosing your battles, but it's hard unless you have, you know, your community that you can confide to and seek solace and help from.
I actually think you highlight a really important point, Alondra, which is the opportunity for all individuals to pursue a graduate degree. And there just simply is not enough diversity in the graduate pool because it's not possible for everybody. And that's because, you know, the stipends that are available are so limited, or sometimes they're $12,000 for the year, and that's not feasible to live on. I know at my graduate school, which was in Massachusetts, which is really expensive cost of living, and the stipend was $15,000. So, you know, if you either needed to have some other source of income, or you were able to live with family, or you took out loans and got a lot of debt, which is really not the way that you want to start out a career. And so there isn't enough representation of graduate student experiences, first of all, because it isn't very diverse. And we need to figure out how we can open those spaces and allow for greater opportunity for all individuals to pursue a graduate degree, rather than just those who have the means to do so. And that would be a huge step for even transforming the discipline as a whole, because the more that we can diversify the new student body, the more we'll see those experiences taking hold as we go down the line in the years to come. So I think that's a great point, and that's something that all programs, unfortunately, have to start thinking about, which now more than ever is going to be more challenging considering the pandemic and the budget considerations that are to come. But maybe fundraising and looking for different donors, this is really the time to highlight the change that can be made. So thank you for sharing that experience, because I do think that's important in terms of where we can go from here.
Well, and I'd like to join into this conversation. So in terms of the question of, you know, have you had challenges in a space that wasn't inclusive? I would probably say that all of us have potentially encountered spaces that weren't inclusive, and to the points that have been made, you know, we have to decide in the moment how to navigate it. To me, it often comes down to, do I feel like I have enough institutional power or enough social capital in that moment to really push back? And so I want to go at this from a slightly different direction and say that to those of us who now feel like we have institutional power, or we feel like we have social capital, we should do what we can to be shields to those folks who are not experiencing inclusive environments. And even if that means sometimes we don't experience them ourselves fully, I think it's really important that, you know, if you hear something offensive in a meeting, you speak up and you say at the meeting, do you want to say what you meant by that? Do you want to explain that more? Because that sounded to me like X. or whatever, and so challenging things when they happen, not privately consulting with someone later saying, oh, I'm so sorry that happened, these kinds of things. So my point is, if you feel like you have institutional power and you see people who are in situations where they need advocates, or even you think they might want advocates, maybe ask them ahead of time if this is an ongoing problem, or like I said, in the moment, you can interrupt that and you can be that shield. Where if you have more institutional power, you can sort of take that on more. And so I've always tried to do that in any circumstance that I can. I'm sure that I need to improve. I'm sure I could improve. But again, I just want to encourage us, those of us who, if you see a graduate student being treated in a certain way, intervene. If you see somebody being talked to in a meeting, intervene. And again, I don't always feel like I can in some instances, but when I can, I should, and I will endeavor to always do so. So I just want to encourage those of us who are allies, who consider ourselves allies, to take that work seriously.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to let the panel know that you have about 5 minutes, 5 minutes to go. So I will mute myself again. Thank you.
So that's 5 minutes total time.
Yes.
Okay, so we can open it up to questions from the audience. So let me see if there are any questions. Yeah, feel free to enter your questions in the chat if you have any questions for us. I see Jennifer Ortiz, Dr. Jennifer Ortiz made a great point. She says, and we must support grad students once they are in the program. Too many programs accept diverse candidates so they can check a box, but then offer no support while they are in the program.
Can I just build? No, I was going to ask, can I just build on that in terms of actually what you said, Sean, a minute ago, also about hiring diverse candidates and making sure those voices get on the tenure track, because that'll get you through the first 2, 3, 4 years. That some of this goes back to making sure that support continues through obtaining tenure, or through, like Jen Ortiz said, through the graduate program to actually get the degree. We've admitted students is not the same as we have graduated students who are successful and had positive experiences in the program.
So true.
I was going to say, in relation to Jen's comment, it can be difficult for faculty to support students, especially in PWIs, if there's no backing from administration. When universities allow outright discriminatory events on campus, this setting says that it's not a safe space for those underrepresented students. If faculty, especially faculty of color, when we approach administration about student conduct in the classroom and the university's response is no response, then this shows students that they aren't safe and that they aren't protected by their own university. So it's like, it's but so much faculty can do on an individual one-on-one account. But if there's no backing or support from the university, the students begin to see that and they begin to be re-traumatized, not only in society or their own communities, but then also in the classroom, where the classroom is no longer a safe space. So sorry, just me venting.
So true.
And what does it say to faculty too, who are then in those circumstances? So not just our students, but faculty who feel like, am I welcome here?
And Vanessa, you raised an important point about people should be willing to stand up when they see these microaggressions occurring. And so there are many instances where I'll get a text, or email, hours after the situation happened, and I'm like, I always feel that I can defend myself, but it's always helpful to have an ally there who's willing to speak up, maybe use some of their privilege to point out, the harms that occurred. And so I think it's important for people to, be willing to go to speak up publicly. So if that's during a department meeting, your comments are more helpful if you speak up when that situation happened, rather than waiting till after the meeting to say you have my support and you're there for me. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I appreciate it, but I'm like, damn, this would have been way more helpful and probably maybe have led to change in the department if other people would have saw that I'm not the only one, who felt that your language or behavior is problematic. And especially when many of these, you know, situations can be racialized. Oh, he's just the angry Black guy, you know, he's making it up, he racializes everything. And now if I have another, you know, it would be helpful if I have a white colleague who also sees the hypocrisy or the this, you know, the harmful treatment, and they're able to shed light onto it. So now it's, you know, now it's clear that I'm not the only one who views this behavior to be problematic. But yeah, that was a important point that you raised, and it needs to happen more often. And I think we're running out of time. So are there any last, I guess, comments or questions in the chat that we could try to respond to quickly before we head out, or are we all out of time?
There's a question in the chat from an anonymous attendee. To Janet's point, are administrators having any conversation like this in order to support faculty and students of color?
My university was one of the universities that released a statement that was perceived to be BS, given the history and responses to events on campus, not only for Black students, but for the LGBTQ community. So there's a history of events that shows that the response is no response, and definitely not in protection of those students who were seeking some support. So yeah, I guess that answers, maybe doesn't answer the question, I'm not sure.
Okay, so thank you so much. I thought this was a great panel, and I hope that, you know, obviously this conversation continues, but I also hope that we get to do it in person very soon as well. I hope everybody enjoys CrimCon 2020. This video is going to be posted online, hopefully by the end of the year from this panel. In the meantime, I have to end this to restart for the next group.
Before we head out, can I throw a quick plug real quick?
Go for it, John.
Yeah, again, this is the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the Division on Women in Crime. So if you want to find out more information about some of the work we're doing, I would suggest that you check out the division's website. But also the division has a Twitter page. I think it's, what is it, ASCDWC, I want to say is the Twitter handle. I'm not 100% sure, but if you want more information, feel free to contact me, reach out to any of us, and we'll provide you with more information. And again, we have a virtual forum coming up in June. It's on anti-racism and intersectionality in feminist criminology. We'll be sure to, you know, advertise that event as it gets closer. And it's a virtual forum from 11 to 6 p.m. On June 4th. So be on the lookout for more information about that event. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you for your help with the technical assistance. We really appreciate it.
It's what we're here for. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the attendees, and everybody have a nice day. Take care.
Thank you all. Take care.